Hey everybody, Jem Schofield of the C47 and another episode of Gearbox 2.0. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about camera systems from the past, present, and future, so let's get started. All right, kids, so this episode is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a trip down memory lane for me and hopefully a little insight into me when it comes to photography and video production and different camera systems that I have used over the years. I hope you find it interesting. I definitely find it interesting when I am watching certain YouTube channels and creators and also listening to podcasts and finding a little bit about the background of people. So let's see how it all goes. Where are we going to start? So we're going to start here with the little manual that I still have. I'm a nostalgic type of person, and this manual is for the Pentax K1000. And if you are familiar with this camera system, you'll know that it is a tank of an SLR camera. It is the first camera that I owned. It was given to me by my father as a used camera, and it got a lot of usage from me. Now, my father, when I was growing up, made a transition in terms of his career. He was always in the arts. He was a manager in the music industry, a musician, and he transitioned to becoming a professional photographer, which was prior to that a hobby of his, when I was growing up in New York. And so at that time, we actually got an enlarger in our small kitchen in Manhattan on the Upper West Side, and after dinner, at a certain point, when it became dark, later in the summer, earlier in the winter, the trays came out, developer, fixer, all of that kind of stuff. And so I would go out and shoot, and then I would develop, and I would print. And I was probably more adept at the developing and printing side of it. I think that my I know that my core understanding of the triangle and how a camera worked was nowhere near what it needed to be, I think, would be a good way to put it. But that's what happens when you grow up. You know, you have varying degrees of learning and experience, but it did lead me to continuing with that, to submit a portfolio, to get into a specialized high school in New York for the arts on my photography portfolio. And then the rest of my high school thing is a whole different story. Transitioned to a different school across country, and did do some video stuff there and definitely continued in the arts. But the photography side of it, while it stayed for a while, it kind of fell off at a certain point in time. Now I have a couple of older cameras here that are not the K1000. First one, which is a recent gift to me by my father for the holidays, for Christmas, is a Nikon F with a beautiful lens. This used to be my grandfather's. He was a hobbyist. He was not a professional photographer. So it is gently used and in great shape, and I have another one of his lenses in my kit. This camera right here, Canon AE1, this is my wife's first camera and took her all the way through the School of Visual Arts. She also shot a lot of medium format, and she still has a very strong affinity for this camera system. And, you know, we see obviously a trend now for some of the newer cameras, especially from companies like Fuji, where this retro look is definitely being applied. Relatively small for an SLR, definitely smaller than the Nikon F or Nikon F and the K1000. And then not as small as a camera system like the Olympus OM, which my father actually moved to at a certain point in his career. I think he started Canon, went Olympus OM. I still have a lot of the Zuiko lenses of his, and then he went back to Canon when the whole digital thing happened. So the camera thing went away, and video started to come into my life. And then when I was done with school, at a certain point, my company started to do video production work, and I was primarily hiring people out for that work. So there was a lot of Betacam SP, Digibeta stuff, sort of introduction to nonlinear editing. And that was sort of mid to late 90s. And then this whole thing with Mini DV happened. In fact, this is not what started it. We have the PD-150 from Sony, the 170. I actually owned a little camera called the Optura Pi from Canon, but my first purchase into the world of video in a serious way was the DVX100A. And this camera, or in the original DVX100, DVX100B, was really the first mini DV based camera that had 24 frames per second. It had that beautiful Canon, Panasonic look. Not that Canon has a bad look, but it really changed a lot of things. And I shot a lot of stuff, and I would say that my education in terms of learning how to shoot video really happened with this camera system. And I shot a lot of content on the DVX100 series, but also other cameras. And then when we moved to HD, I graduated in between these two right here to the EX1, and that was my next video purchase. I had since sold that a long time ago. Loved it, very sharp, great little lens. Obviously they made the EX3, which is also an interchangeable lens version of that. And that was kind of the workhorse, the first Cine Alta branded affordable Sony product that had 24. So little flubs in there, but I'm going straight through on this one. And then we started to do some things. And what did we do? We started to use 35mm lens adapters on these HD camera systems so we could get selective focus. We could get essentially that depth of field that we'd be getting out of a larger sensor camera. And then this magic happened right here. You know what it is, 5D Mark II. Changed a lot of things in the industry, kind of changed the whole way we looked at things. And even a show like NAB transformed because of that. So we sort of had the first part of that, affordability with mini DV and nonlinear editing and Final Cut Pro coming to the market. And then when this came out, we had that missing ingredient, which was selective focus, small format, with its problems, of course. But we started to adapt these camera systems, still love the look of this, have a 5D Mark III as well. And then started to look at other camera systems in the market. You know, we started to look at other things like the FS700. The camera systems from Sony were really interesting because they were giving you some high-speed options that we weren't getting in these DSLRs. Sony was also doing some really interesting things with full-frame mirrorless. In fact, the order here should probably be a little bit different because I went into this camera system before this camera system. This became the workhorse of my business because it kind of combined the best of, well, let's say EX1 world with DSLR large sensor world, and the C100 Mark I was the one. I eventually wound up getting and still have two of these cameras. They still work pretty hard on different things that I work on, but I have now graduated to the C200 as my main digital cinema camera and have also shot on so many different cameras. I would say that along with the C300 Mark II, that the FS7 from Sony are the two cameras prior to last year that I had shot on the most in terms of UHD 4K stuff, and of course have created a lot of content around that stuff educationally. A7S, low light, king, A7S II even more so, waiting for that A7S III with hopefully, for me, a better codec. Better data rates would be huge now that we're starting to see those higher data rates in the GH5 series. And of course, what we're going to be talking about, which is Fujifilm, or not of course, but I'm going to. And then little mirrorless. This obviously transition has been a big one. M3, this was really just a vlogging camera for me that I had used for quite a while. It didn't have dual pixel CMOS AF. That was really the kind of downfall of the camera for me. That has since been resolved with a camera like the M50. And then it really all goes back full circle, because around this time, I got the itch for this again. It wasn't that I hadn't been taking photographs, but the experience, and I wound up getting a Fujifilm X-E2, interchangeable lens version, 27mm f2.8 street photography, 18 to 55 for, you know, image stabilized video kit lens. And I love those Fuji cameras. I love the way they operate, and I never thought that I would be shooting video on them. but now with the X-T3, I am definitely doing that. And as the next camera system for me, really, besides the C200, that's going to be the travel camera for stills and video. That's what I'll be shooting episodes of Gearbox on when I'm on the road, and I will be getting some additional lenses for that, the 56-1.2 for portraits. That's really for stills purposes. And then probably two of the f2 versions, the weather-resistant ones, the 23mm and the 35mm. So there's a lot of history here. Not all my camera systems are in front of me. I'm excited about where we're going with mirrorless in 2019. I think the fact that we are now seeing things like RAW over HDMI and new smaller format cameras giving us higher data rates, giving us log recording, I think it's all just a win for all of us. And as the lenses catch up in terms of IS and tuned more for video shooting, so we can use them even more effectively for that, I think that that space is very exciting right now. And I wasn't very excited about it last year, but this year I am. And then the evolution of digital cinema cameras. I'm still using a lot of things. Certain projects require a camera like the Arri Alexa, and I'll use that on the project. Other projects will be a C300 Mark II or an FS7 II. The EVA 1 really has, something that no other camera on the market right now has in that price point, which is that 5.7K sensor that you can basically spit out of that spigot and record in a higher resolution to an external recorder. And that means that we're probably going to be using those for the foreseeable future as well. In my book, I would prefer to have everything internal, but the reality is that right now that's probably not going to happen. We're going to get something internally that's going to be really good, and then we're going to be able to get something that's great in terms of a recorded image externally. There are exceptions to that. We see Blackmagic kind of going down their road, and we could see Blackmagic RAW going into a lot of their camera bodies and it being a codec that is recorded internally. The question is, when are we going to see a lot of cameras recording ProRes RAW internally? And when are we going to see other NLEs supporting ProRes RAW natively besides Final Cut Pro 10? So I digressed a little bit, but I hope that this gives you some insight into a little bit of my history. Again, it all started here with this Pentax K1000. And I have a lot of great memories. I actually still have boxes of prints and contact sheets and things like that from this camera system when I was a kid. And I don't know about you, but I tend to always remember when I encounter them, the photographs that I took, because we have the amazing ability to record what happens to us. And so while I don't remember exact events or dates and things like that, unless something comes up in conversation and I'm trying to remember them, when I encounter a photograph, it brings me immediately back to that. Sometimes I get a feeling of actually being there, taking that photograph and just having that experience again, which is one of the reasons I love doing this. So there you go, a little history, a little future. I hope you guys found that interesting. Looking forward to your comments, and if this sparks any ideas for future content, I will tell you that I am very interested in creating more content around photography and hybrid camera systems, which I didn't think would be where I'd want to go this year, but I definitely do think it is something that is going to happen more. And with that X-T3 and maybe some of the other cameras that are being released this year and that were released at the end of last year, that may be very much something that happens. And I'll see you guys next time on Gearbox.